What's up? Bradley Aidan Johnson here, and I'm just doing a video on failure as a tool for programming training and why it is a problem. And I want to start it off with saying, first of all, I have trained every single set to failure before. I have trained some sets not to failure and some sets to failure, and I've trained never hitting failure. At the moment, I haven't failed a set in 6 or 7 months. That's where I'm at now. Yeah. And so before I start off, I'm going to start off with the Jason Blaha quote, which is, "If you miss a rep during training, you deserve to fucking die." And whilst that is a bit of an overstep and maybe a bit far, a lot of people will say, "Whoa, calm down," I like it and I roll with it. And generally, I'm removing training failure from all programming, and it's definitely not a part of the badge method training program, novice training program. That will be coming soon. You heard me. Anyway, the analogy now that I've got my view out of the way to explain to people is, the reason people train to failure is because it guarantees a hypertrophy response by making sure that you've exhausted all muscle fibers. Yes, of course. Right? So if you train to the point where you can't train anymore, obviously all fibers have fired. Yeah? Now, because of this, if you train to failure, obviously you're going to grow faster. And yeah, brilliant. That makes sense. If you hit all fibers and they're all activated, they will stimulate and it will make a maximal hypertrophy response. However, here's an analogy for you, right? And I said this to somebody before, so if you saw this on my training to failure video that I did before, you'd have seen it then, but I'm going to say it now one more time. Training to failure is like parking your car by smashing it into your house. Because at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is you're as close as possible, right? Right? Or maybe not. Sure, if you smash your car into your house, you're as close as your car can possibly get, yeah, to your home, your home. That's a mixture of home and house, man. You're as close as you possibly can. So, since the point of the driving, just like the point of training, is to get yourself as close to your home as possible, so that when you have the shortest walk that you possibly can have, the ultimate point of training is to be as close as possible to your house. However, this analogy is so fucking good. However, I don't need to really explain the negatives, but I will, of smashing your car into your house to get there. Granted, you're as close as you possibly could get, right? But now your car is fucked. Because of that, it may need to go into the shop. Yeah? What this means is there'll be a period of time where you're actually having to walk further distances to get home because your car isn't available to you. This is what happens when you train to failure. That one single time, definitely, you exhaust every single fiber. Good work. You look at that, you got out your car, you step basically into your door, you're right there, it's the most successful drive. But now, because your car's not available to you, it eats into your recovery. Your recovery is less. And that's in terms of subsequent sets. If you're doing 2 sets, your first set to failure, you're not gonna be able to do anything like enough for the next set because your car is fucked. And that also eats into recovery, makes inroads into recovery for sets down the road. That could be 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours later. That training to failure burns you. Your muscle fibers are damaged in a way that makes them unable to simulate another response like that for a long time. Also, it has central nervous system implications that mean it's effectively the same thing. So, you've trained to failure, great, for that day, but Rome wasn't built in a day, a muscle wasn't built in a session. So, it's no good having the best session ever. No one ever did a session that was so good, yeah, that it would have made any difference to their physique if taken over a period of a year. If you go train for a year, and at the end of that year, you look back on your training program and think, oh, I could have added 1 training session on January the 30th, or you could have taken that January the 30th training session away, your results at the end of that year would be identical. Nothing would have changed. There's 1 training session is not appreciable, but you could have done something in it that eats into your recovery, and when it's an ethos of training, will continue to eat into your recovery in a way that will always have a negative implication. So over time, you will gradually just be training more and more and more inefficiently, as you are not allowing yourself enough time to stimulate a full adaptation response sufficient to come back when you're training and be completely rested to actually be stronger. You're still recovering from the previous one. Also, you are heightening the chances of injury for a marginal benefit. The problem with this is just because training to 100% stimulate definitely 100% of all fibers maximally, yes, great, that's good, right? That doesn't mean that training a little bit shy of that stimulates only like 12%. We're talking about a tiny difference in training response for a ridiculously heightened chance of injury and increase in recovery time. It makes it poor programming. And then that only looks at, and this is another thing that bodybuilders do all the time, which is a big problem, they only look at training as muscle fibers, like you are just a sack of muscle fibers that need to be stimulated, and forgetting that actually the execution of the way in which you perform things is key. It's important to do things well. The better you do things, the better you will become at doing things, the better you become at doing them. Yeah, that may sound like I said that too many times, but it's not. Think about what I said. So, you train in a way that always goes to failure, right? Let's say you're doing 6 rep sets or triples, and you're training to failure. What does your final deadlift look like as a novice trainee training to failure? You can see it, right? What does your final squat look like? What do your knees do? You can see it, right? Your final bench, what does it look like? All of these reps, what you do is by training to failure over and over again, by getting right up to the limit, is ingrain what we call faulty muscle patterns. You train and train and train and train and become better at being worse at the lift. Whereas if you train slightly shy of that, you can concentrate on the technique and become better at doing it. So in the future, if you do actually lift something that does approach failure, you will default to your most why am I struggling for words right now? You will default to your most natural movement pattern, the one that you have learned and is most ingrained into your motor pattern. So you will always do the thing that you're most comfortable doing, the way you feel strongest. And if you teach yourself always to do perfect form, something that approximates perfect form, when it becomes one of those grinder reps, you're not going to default to something that's you're not used to. So let's give an example with the squat, right? Deadlift, let's do that, because I just realised that this can't really show you. Deadlift, this is how you deadlift. You've got your back like this, right? And you do sets like that, deadlift, sets like that, right? Now, you do sets like that and been doing them for a year, at like an RP 8 or 9, and one day you fail. What happens to your back after a year of training the correct way is that you go, oh God, this is heavy. However, if you train to failure from the start, you do one rep like this, another rep like this, and a final rep like this. Now, whenever you're under failure, you default to the thing that you're strongest in, the thing that always moves most weight, which is if you went up to do a single and it's something like a 1 rep max, you get in there and you do this, because that's how you taught yourself to lift. Over the long term, you're weaker. You can lift less weight. Your muscles are smaller. The way in which you do things is very, 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 very important. It's not just the fact that you did stuff and you went hard or killed legs at the gym, as the dumb fuck memes will say. Failure shouldn't be part of your training programming because it's not part of the training programming of any sport. Training to failure regularly is not what people do. No one does that. You shouldn't miss reps. You shouldn't be close to missing reps. You should always be within an area of comfort so your form looks roughly the way it should always look. That doesn't mean be a form Nazi and be 100% perfect, and if there's any slight rounding of the back, like, oh, you got to back off, drop the weight. There's a balance to be struck, and that striking that balance is, of course, the domain of a good coach, to find that sweet spot that allows you to adapt and become stronger whilst not pushing the envelope too far. That means that there's too much to recover from, there's heightened chance of injury, and that you actually teach them to do it poorly. So what I just wanted to say to them, if you're training to failure, it'll work in the sense that, of course it will work, it'll make you stronger. There's no such thing as a way of going in the gym and training that'll make you weaker. It's always going to be making you stronger. However, it's not optimal. And since you're on YouTube looking for optimal training, programming protocols, etc., there you go. It's not optimal. So for anyone that ever wonders, training to failure is like driving your car into your house to park it. I mean, sure, you're as close to your house as you possibly can get, and well, after all, isn't that the real point? Maybe. Peace.